And welcome to Found in Translation, a weekly-ish exploration of one fellow's translation of the Christian scriptures, one chapter, or a little less, or a little more, at a time. I'm Brandon Rhodes, and across the internet from me is the translator himself, Brandon Johnson. Hi, Brandon.
Brandon.
Good to see you this wonderful sunny day.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah. Well, we've got a lot to talk about today for everybody. But before we do that, I wanted to make sure for those who haven't given these episodes a listen, particularly who didn't listen way back to that introductory episode, if you might be able to explain to folks what we're even doing here and, give them a little bit of context for this.
Yeah, the centerpiece of what we're talking about is my work in translating the Christian scriptures, the ones written in Greek specifically. And I started that project for my kids, as we've talked about a few times, and it has evolved since then. Like we were just talking about last week, these footnotes are a bit heady for an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. But that was the initial push. And what I wanted to do that for is there's kind of some things that were important to me, of a lot of words with a lot of baggage that we keep using because those are the words that have been used before in translation, and not because they necessarily are actually the most appropriate to convey what the meaning is. And me having no problem whatsoever just tossing it out, because I'm not trying to get paid. I'm not trying to get a publisher to be willing to publish it, and I think those are some of the big considerations for other people when they're like, well, we can't get rid of sin because no one will pay for it. We can't get rid of faith or righteousness because no one will pay for it. I can do what I think is actually appropriate, because there's no incentive for to not do that.
And some of those words you just listed are words you wanted to get around because they're just kind of syrupy religious words or overly technical.
Yeah, that's what we've been using. Religious technical terms is what we've been calling them. Yeah, not because I just don't like sin, so I'm gonna just quietly hide it behind the curtain so that no one can see it. It's no, I'm still translating what's happening there. I'm just what I think I'm doing it in a way that's actually showing what the meaning is, instead of just putting this word, that sin, that people kind of think they know what it means, but there's lots of different opinions, and who knows.
Right. And then the reason we decided we wanted to start recording these and sharing them with folks is, one, we were just having a great time and there was good energy, but second, there were all these very compelling and healing insights you were having along the way, often in a direction of liberation or healing, that we thought, you know what, let's talk about that. It's not just that you're finding a better word for righteousness. It's the theme that you needed to play around with there that had been kind of hidden, that example of that word often being used in a framework of the core problem is we broke rules, and therefore we are unrighteous, and the solution is how to get us out of being rule breakers. Well, if you you change the word, you change the metaphor, you change the story. And what is the story actually about, if not the crisis of rule breaking? And it gets really
there is an alternative,
radical in that. So I hope everybody listening in or watching, that's been a helpful introduction of why we're playing around with some of these words together, and hoping that it'll be life-giving and vitalizing for you all as well.
Because it is a fun exercise in just getting nerdy and can I find a different way to say it than everyone else is saying it? And that's fine. It's like a puzzle game, but it's not really worth sharing.
Right.
What makes it worth sharing is that I think it's allowing things to surface, allowing things to be accessible, that can make a positive difference for how we talk about things as an entire community.
Yeah. So we are going to be talking this week about the second part of the first chapter of Ephesians. Now, if you haven't had a chance to read Brandon's translation, well, for those of you joining on YouTube or Facebook, we have the translation up on the side of the screen here in a minute. And for those of you listening, we do have a link to the translation in the show notes. So we encourage you who have the ability to hit pause to do that, give it a careful read, and don't lose track of those footnotes. A lot of good information in there. So go ahead, pause or whatever, and give it a read. And we will set up the translation on our screen. Okay, so we're going to go through and hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ideas in Ephesians 1:15 through 23. That's the end of the first chapter there. We're going to talk about you and your faithfulness in verse 15. We're going to talk about wise and curious spirit in verse 17, heart in 18, a big elaborate phrase in 1:19, those who are faithful based on what his intense strength has accomplished. And then we're going to talk about assembly or church in verse 22. So, Brandon, could you read this linguistically elaborate paragraph for us on one go? That's a poke at Paul, not you.
Yeah, I mean, some of both, maybe. We'll see. Based on this, I have heard about you and your faithfulness to the Lord Jesus and your love for all the sacred ones. And I do not stop giving thanks for you when I remember you during my prayers. I pray that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the renowned Father, may give you a wise and curious spirit through getting to know him, the eyes of your heart having been illuminated for you to see what hope his invitation is about, what wealth his renowned inheritance is for those who are sacred, and what immeasurable surplus his power is for us who are faithful based on what his intense strength has accomplished. He accomplished it through Christ when he woke him up from among the dead and seated him on his right in the highest heavens, above every leader and authority and power and lordship and every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one about to arrive. He made everything responsible to cooperate under his feet and gave him to the assembly as head over everything. It is his body, the completion of the one through whom everything is made complete.
The word of the Lord.
Be to God.
So, a word that nobody has seemed willing to translate with any deviation, but is so important in reading the Pauline epistles, particularly I think of Ephesians, is just the word you right there in verse 15, because it's actually plural. It's y'all.
Yeah.
It's you all.
This is maybe the one aspect of the King James that might actually be better than just the fact that English 400 or 500 years ago had a separate word for a plural audience. Ye, there's more than one person being addressed, and over time we don't have that anymore. But Greek does, and uses it a lot. So that shifts things, and there's not an easy way to do that unless you want to get really colloquial and start doing y'all, or if you're from like Boston, like use.
Or yins if you're from the mitten. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Get those Michiganders involved. But so yeah, you're saying willingness. It's partly because there's just not a good way. I could add, I played with it a little bit when I was first starting, and like hyphenating you all as like a term, and it's just like, nah, this is weird. So I gave up on it. But
yeah, that's fascinating. Like, just the word y'all is too colloquial, or it's too like regional.
yeah, colloquial. I don't think it's okay. I think everyone knows what it means. It's not like, what are we talking about here? But
yeah,
yeah, it's just not the feel of like the level of language that's being used here. It's just a little bit more. I mean, Paul was a very educated person,
yeah,
and his writing shows it. And even someone from the South who would conversationally use y'all probably wouldn't if they're writing an academic article, right? It's just not the right setting for it.
Oh, yeah, but this isn't an academic article.
It's not academic.
Yeah, I mean,
it's true.
He like comfortably scrambles his metaphors. He talks about the eyes of your heart later on, and it's that's not a thing, Paul.
Yeah.
Because it really does open up a lot of meaning here.
Once what are you seeing in the difference?
Well, for starters, he's not just talking to me or to the one person. He's not talking primarily to individuals, like a large number of individuals. Right. There's a difference between a large number of individuals and a community, between trees and a forest. And he's talking to the forest first here. And so he's not just like, man, I've heard of you specifically, Gary, the Greek. He's talking about all y'all, and particularly as that unfolds into and your faithfulness, which is another translation decision that you've made, that we've talked about.
Faithfulness.
Y'all, all y'all's faithfulness. And that's usually and your faith to the Lord Jesus. Yeah. Right. And that carries a different energy to it when it's when I heard of you and your individual cognitive assent or to Jesus, then boy, that was just amazing, and I prayed for you. He's saying, I heard about how all of y'all are being faithful to Jesus. It's much more full-bodied and fully lived out together. I heard about the way you guys are socially enacting Christ together. Right.
Which I think goes in the rest of the sentence, right? Your faithfulness to the Lord Jesus and your love for all the sacred. Like those are kind of the same thing. Yeah. The two sides of the same coin there.
And so you get a good chunk of the in this example anyway, of the payload of that, just by making that shift from faith to faithfulness. Here is anything that would be helpful for folks on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think just keeping that in mind for every single thing that's said through the entire book of Ephesians here, it's talking to the group as a group. Like you said, not just a collection of individuals.
And what about faithfulness versus faith there? Like, for those who are only watching this, listen to us talking about that in Matthew, which we did quite a bit.
Yeah, we spent a lot on it. But just kind of this basic idea that I don't think belief is ever the right word to use there. And faith could be if you're understanding it in certain ways, but not others. But that idea of just like, I cognitively say yes to certain ideas, certain doctrines, has nothing to do with what this is talking about, and never does. Right. Not ever. Let me just say that again. It never has to do with what doctrines you believe. And so there's this sense of it does have to do with trust, which is a related concept with believing, but it's much more like I believe in you, Brandon, not the way that we say I believe in Santa Claus.
Right. Yeah.
It's like I have confidence that you are able to accomplish what you're setting out to accomplish, not I think you exist, as opposed to you're just an imaginary made up thing.
Yeah. Like, do you believe in God is like the most boring damn question.
Right.
It's like, what the hell
But
does that even mean?
It's a translation
It doesn't change anything.
of the Bible. Yeah, but it doesn't mean what we think it means now. Originally, it meant something more like I have confidence in God, not I believe God exists.
Yes. Yeah. So let's move down to verse 17. I pray that God may give you a wise and curious spirit through getting to know him. That's not how it usually goes. What's usually there?
Yeah, let me see what it says in another translation here, because I don't remember off the top of my head how other people are saying this. But I can find it pretty easily because there are Bibles everywhere. Okay. Yeah, it says what are we looking at here? This is for 17, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I pray, this is a New English translation. It says, I pray that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, will give you spiritual wisdom and revelation in your growing knowledge of him. And I think I took some of the words to be related to each other differently than how they took it here, as you can kind of see. So the specific phrase wise and curious spirit there being in the New English translation as spiritual wisdom and revelation.
All right.
So I think the problem is that there's not Greek is a complex language. Okay. So there's forms for nouns based on its function in a sentence that may or may not have prepositions that go with it. And so the form of spirit of it here is a genitive, is what it's called. And so the easiest way that can be very unhelpful at times, but the easiest way to translate a genitive is like of spirit or of wisdom or of curiosity. And the problem is that it can be translated into English either direction. So if I say wisdom of spirit, what it looks like in the Greek, or spirit of wisdom in the Greek, it might actually be that one is describing the other, or vice versa. The second one could be describing the first. And you have to base it on context. What the best way to do that is, there's nothing in the wording itself that tells you.
Okay, so what's that mean here?
So that means that for the New English translation, they took spirit to be describing the wisdom and the revelation, but I'm taking wisdom and curiosity to be describing spirit. So we made the opposite kind of judgment call there. Yeah.
And then instead of revelation or some variation on that, you went with curious. That's the part that really like piqued my curiosity.
Check my notes here a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, traditionally it's revelation, and it's actually the Greek word where we get the English word apocalypse, referring to the book of Revelation. So there's that connection there. And it really means like the sense of uncovering something. And so revealing it because you've taken off the cover, right? But the way it's being used here really is like the concept of uncovering. So it's a spirit of uncovering.
Sure.
Is maybe the most literal way to translate the phrase spirit of uncovering, which, what does that mean? I take it to mean like having this way of approaching life together that's about discovery and trying to figure things out and to get to the bottom of things, to get at the heart of things, to see things as they really are.
Yeah.
Which to
Truthfulness
me
and
says,
unfolding. Yeah.
yeah, which to me says curiosity. Like I
Mm-hmm.
have this posture of humility that I don't already know, this
Mm-hmm.
posture of I have something to learn, to uncover. I'm curious, and I'm going to keep that stance of I'm in a constant state of like understanding more as I go, and I don't have it already figured out, which to me is wisdom. Like that's knowing that you don't know is wisdom.
Yeah, it's such a fundamental component of wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
and it's to think of wisdom or knowledge as or revelation as things that are settled and fixed and end in periods and exclamation marks.
Mm-hmm.
One, that's boring. Two, it's not what's happening here. Three, it's not actually how the soul works.
Mm-hmm.
And to look at it here in this passage uh, would give you to read this in the through the lens of a more settled and fixed, and may give you all the answers, may give you a spirit of like certainty and inflexibility, and winning arguments through getting to know Jesus. It's like, wait, that doesn't feel
Mm-hmm.
personal or human or disposed towards loving or humility.
Right.
So curiosity expresses there's always more. Like just when you think you're done, there's always more. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's more of what the divine is doing in the renewal of the world, uh, and in taking on our flesh. And our ongoing lives are going to keep on helping us get to know Christ, and our getting to know Christ is going to help keep us curious to what's beyond, which feels so much better than you got the settled factoids.
Right. Yeah, this whole sentence, like translating it as through getting to know him as opposed to the NETs. I'll look at that again as a good example of your growing knowledge of him. So different way, but essentially this is an ongoing process of understanding more over time, right?
Yeah.
It's never done. And I think that's part of what led me to go with the curious spirit as like a posture, because it's that wisdom to know that this is an ongoing process and I don't already know, which is really uncomfortable when your sense of security is like, do I have it right? Do I have it right? If I don't have it right, there's a big problem. I might be going to hell. I might be like whatever. But the question isn't, do you have it right? The question is, are you open to growing in understanding and in a way that it shows it in stuff and how you're treating people, interacting, relating with the
Yeah.
world and the people around you, not just like, do I know the right thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good. So that next verse there, they're getting to know him, the eyes of your heart having been illuminated. That word heart is, you went with the way that's usually translated by English speaking folk.
Yeah, usually, yeah.
It's another point where I thought, oh, it's a bit of a surprise. And it might be helpful for folks to get a window into the almost philosophy of language
Yeah, which
involved
one?
here. Yeah, and how? Yes.
Yeah. So I think you and I have talked other times, and that like the word that's here is not actually about the heart in the organ that pumps blood. It's actually like about bowels or the intestines or like the guts. Sometimes it might even, depending on, there's a couple of different words that can be translated this way. At least one of them sometimes can be referred to as the womb or the uterus. But it's about these lower down organs as opposed to the one up in my chest pumping blood.
Yeah.
Not the heart. But we use similar the heart in English in American culture to represent similar things to what Greek-speaking people used this word, the more like intestines, to represent similar concepts. It's a symbol, not an actual thing.
Yeah, it's trying to describe the seat of desire, longing, affection.
Yeah. But in a narrower way than we use it in English. We kind of use heart to represent just like emotions, period.
Feelings. Yeah. Yeah.
Often with like an affection, like desire, longing, leaning, but not only. Like I'm really happy in my heart, or whatever, sadness, or we kind of talk about that all as happening in my heart.
Right.
Like that's the feelings part of me.
It's weighing on my heart.
And there is some crossover, but not entirely. It's Venn diagram. There's overlapping circles, but they're not the same circle.
Right. Yeah.
This has to do with that longing, that desire, or maybe motivation. Might be a kind of a controlling idea. So what draws me? What things that help propel me in a particular direction?
Yeah. And so in this path of translating this, like you have one extreme over here that is hyper literal and a very disciplined commitment to, well, it meant bowels to them, we're going to stick with that. And there are times elsewhere, especially in Matthew, where you've erred on that side because you believe sticking with that and not modernizing it, or these other two stations along the way.
Yeah,
it was for some clear, subtle reasons.
Yeah, and sometimes I've just explained put in the concept of what the symbol is representing instead of the symbol itself. So like there are times where like deeply moved or something like that was what I used for where it would have been like bowel movement, I guess. I don't know. But something like that, or I used the word desire or motivation a couple of times for heart instead of heart. Problem is that this is connected here with eyes, which is again not about my ocular organs, and is about a symbol of honestly talking about desires. It makes me think of Matthew 6, where if your eye is good, or eye is healthy in the translation that I did, that means that your priorities are about being faithful to loving people, basically. And if your eye is diseased or unimpaired, then your priority is about greed and accumulating for yourself. And so the symbol of the eye is again about what your desires are, what's your motivation. And so if I were to do the eyes of your motivation, that's weird. I either needed to be both of them were the symbol, or both of them not. And here, taking out eyes would obscure that connection to Matthew 6 and other places. That's not the only place that image is used, that are using the metaphor of eyes as a symbol in that way. It's all these different things that I'm trying to keep in mind as I'm making these decisions.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, what a subtle task this is, because these 3 points of hyperliteral bowels, middle point, what's the equivalent? Heart in our culture. Or the other end of things would be, we're just going to have a much more meticulous interpretive option, and you could have put the eyes of your, or the perception or the intention or the focus of your affections, the focus of your affections. Ooh,
yeah,
that's not so bad.
That's a decent phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. And we immediately will associate affections with heart in our physiological
because that's our cultural,
that's our word for it. And focus, it still gets the ocular thing. But at that point, why not? It's okay to live close to the center of the tradition if it's not hurting anything like this of the translation tradition.
Yeah. The point isn't to change it just for the sake of changing it. It's if it's helpful, if it accomplishes if it's some kind of benefit in changing it.
Yes. I guess one reason I wanted to acknowledge this is just about everything you were reading here, or that you've read in another translation of the Bible, they're making those decision between those three and several others along the way and above and below them, all the time. And there's no one consistently good way to do that. It's a matter of deep listening to the text and to one's like readership or audience and time, as well as the tradition between when this was written and who's hearing it now, which has been, I think, a really dominant lens for you of saying, hang on, that word righteousness, it shouldn't be the word righteousness here, because it has developed a toxic and limiting meaning over the course of 2 millennia. And we would be more faithful to Jesus, and to the text by doing otherwise.
Right. Yeah. Because like you're saying, there's no one right way to do this. It's trying to figure out, what decision do I make that I think will get people closer to the liberating and healing message that's in this.
Yeah.
Because eyes of your heart here works. It could be eyes of your bowels. Like, I might put a footnote on that explaining what the heck that's supposed to mean, but that could be a good way to do it, if we're willing to explain it a bit.
That's how Paul did it.
Right. And
it makes sense to us.
Yeah. And the focus of your affections is a good way to do this. There's no one right way. You just have to see which one fits the best for you, or for me in this case. And go for it, with all the while asking, like, why am I making this particular choice? Is it because that's just how it's done before? Is it because it's comfortable for me? Or is it because this is the way that feels like is helping to uncover, with that curiosity, right, of what helps my spirit connect with the Holy Spirit here. He's trying to use the language that's here in front of us.
I dig it.
Yeah.
All right. The next one is verse 19. Could you read that? What you feel is worth reading there? It's trying to catch a falling knife in some ways, because it's part of a bigger sentence.
Yeah, it's like one piece of a very long sentence. Yeah, and what immeasurable surplus. Let me start that over. Get my words out here. What immeasurable surplus his power is for us who are faithful, based on what his intense strength has accomplished. Yeah, that phrase there, the second half of it, us who are faithful, based on what his intense strength has accomplished. It's wordy. It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Probably more so than the more standard ways of rendering this. Which I suppose I could read something to compare it there. The verse being, and what his incomparable greatness of his power toward us who believe, as displayed in the exercise of his immense strength. You notice the word believe, which I just said earlier, never ever going to use it.
Yeah, it's so limiting. And so you went with, for us who are faithful.
Right. Yeah, because it's about that, like we talked about earlier, but I could explain it a bit more. Even that trust that we were talking about, the confidence in, leads to a faithful response, right? Like, that's how we know. That's the difference between like actually trusting someone and saying we trust someone, is how do we follow up on that? Like, do I trust that if I loan you $20, you're going to pay it back? Then I'm going to actually give you $20 because I think you'll pay it back. If I say, yeah, I trust you to pay it back, but I'm not going to give that to you right now, I don't actually trust you. So that's that faithfulness on my part. There's a reciprocal relationship.
Oh, yeah.
So if I trust, in this context, if I trust that the example of Christ is the best way to live,
Sure.
then I'm going to be faithful to actually live in love for each other. Yeah. What questions come up for you as far as like what's in here? Because it's wordy. I don't love the wordiness of it.
I do not have a strong question here. It was something that you were eager to talk about, and I'm blanking on what my questions were going to be.
Yeah. Well, it's a good example of like trying to figure out what to do with prepositions, the word based on there, like instead of like according to,
sure.
Or something like that. The NET, I think, does it as displayed in. It's all that. It's just one Greek word, kata. It's a preposition. So sometimes it's translated like against or based on or according to. There's this connection of kind of having something being grounded.
Yeah.
In something else. Or even if it's talking about movement, that literally means like going downward. But so like the foundation for being faithful, for what us who are faithful, our faithfulness is being grounded in what Christ has accomplished with his version of what intense strength is.
Yeah.
Which isn't power over others. It's self-giving.
Yeah. Yeah. This is another point to honor the deep shifts that do happen when you go from belief to faithfulness, because a belief translation of this would be for us who believe based on what he's done, right?
Sure.
And that's fine. There's something true and healing in that. And it can also be another place we can like lean on. I've certainly heard this big theme of anytime there's a certain layer of faithfulness to Jesus that we don't frankly want to have to do, particularly if it has to do with economics, hospitality to people who are different from us, inclusion of people who we've been boundaried from, those sorts of things. It's really easy, particularly for the like evangelical tribe I grew up in, to say, oh, well, that's just, all you got to do is believe. You just need to trust and believe in the power of God and the cross. You need to just know that it's finished, it's done. There's nothing you can do to earn your salvation. And you're just doing works righteousness right now. You're just trying to, and it tamps down discipleship and faithfulness, because all you have to do is have something between intellectual assent and inner sentimentality, and that's really all Jesus wants to give you. Even if that what you're having cognitive assent towards or inner sentimentality toward doesn't change anything. But if you read this as if you are faithful based on what his intense strength has accomplished, read back the past 10 verses. What has his intense strength accomplished? Well, it has had to do with liberation. It's had to do with liberation from the alienation structures and patterns of our societies and creating one new humanity, like uniting the cosmos together, like in verse, is that 10? It's like being faithful to that unifying, unionizing trajectory or work of God in Jesus Christ. That's a world of difference. To be faithful to that boundary transgressing God is different from based on you who believe that some inner thing happened when Jesus died on the cross, which
Right.
in Christianity, it's important to have some sense of what God did in Jesus Christ on the cross.
Yeah, because there's that reciprocal relationship,
Yeah.
right? Like I trust it because that's the example that we were given.
Yeah.
But here it really is, what's my response to that? Not just like, oh, Jesus did the good things, I don't have to.
Yeah. 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 So I'm excited to see more of the places where that shift from belief to faithful shows up. We found a few places to acknowledge that in Matthew. Man, we're gonna just keep stubbing our toe on this thing in Paul's stuff.
Yeah. It seemed like while both were constant, I think every time it shows up, both are kind of present, trusting and being faithful, and that reciprocal relationship between those two ideas. But in Matthew, it felt much more like the one closer to the surface was the trusting. But in the Paul's stuff, it's definitely the faithfulness is the one closer to the surface in almost all instances.
Oh, I can't wait. But we do have to keep moving along. So the last word to talk about today is in verse 22. Is this the first time that we would get ecclesia?
I'm not sure if it's the first. I think maybe right at the very beginning. But yeah, right. This is the one with any context. First one with any context.
That helps.
Yeah. So in 22, he made everything responsible to cooperate under his feet and gave him to the assembly as head over everything. It is his body, the completion of the one through whom everything is made complete. So assembly being what's traditionally church, ecclesia being the Greek word. And it's one that I'm not fully settled on the best way to translate that. Assembly works, church works. The main reason I didn't go with church is not because church is a bad word, but it's kind of watered down. It's one of those words that just get fuzzy in the background and you just kind of don't stop to think about it.
Yeah.
But still not like trying to figure out what actually highlights the significance of the word, assembly is fine because there is a sense of like it's ecclesia is like the noun version of like essentially those who have been called out of their homes to gather in the street and meet together to hear some news or to or I think you've talked before of like even like a neighborhood association kind of thing. Like they've been called out of their homes for the purpose of like figuring out how to respond to the needs of the community of the neighborhood. And
they're like the watershed council.
There's a responsibility there, and that fits really well with like the calling of the church. The vocation is to take responsibility for the benefit of everyone else and each other. But I've toyed with even like hyphenating like community responding to the call or something like that, or maybe even just community.
Capital C.
Yeah, with a capital C.
That's great. Yeah, it's the word church has just gotten so disappointing often. It really does now mean the building or the or the institution.
Right. Yeah. And which is kind of funny because that's one of the images Paul uses is like constructing a building and having the people, each person who's in the church being like a brick in the building.
Yeah.
That's in there, but no, we've taken it and turned it into just like the four walls that we happen to meet in,
or the thing we do on Sunday.
Right.
which is where, geez, I envy our kin on the other side of the Tiber who, well, it's like, oh no, that's just mass. Like they have a different word for what you do on Sunday or every morning, as the case may be. Right. So at least like, yeah, let's just set that word aside. Like, fine, I'm kind of tired of trying to correct people on it, but let's use a different word for what the spiritual organism of this boundary transgressing kinship network, that as Willie James Jennings calls it. Let's just use a different word.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens, or a few different words. And I think assembly is nice. I'm far enough removed from K through 12 that I don't think of.
Yeah, an assembly. Although, that's a gathering of people for a purpose, right?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, I know we'll have more to say about the assembly, about church, what it means to be this unionized body further as we go throughout Ephesians, because while the center of this letter is about the unifying work, past, present, and future of Christ, the bulk of that is what it means for us together in our lives together. It's very much about how to be the people who are brought together, the assembled. We were like a Lego set all over the floor. We're being brought together. And I'm not totally sold on that metaphor I just used. That's why. Yeah. So that no man or woman may step on any of those Legos.
That's
and
right.
Curse God who made them.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think too, like we had toyed with how much would be fun to talk about Colossians as we're going through Ephesians, because they are so similar in so many ways. And so even some of the specific like phrasing is the same. And like I did work of like kind of going back and forth as I was working on them, and like the context of one helped clarify a word for me that helped me figure out what to do with it in the other one, and vice versa. And that was fun. But one of the differences is a little bit of the focus. They're both ultimately about the church, really.
Yeah.
And they talk about Jesus and God and the divine and the spiritual stuff, not as the focus so much, but as the controlling like understanding. Like, here are the assumptions we need to hold so we can get to the like what we're really talking about, which is how to be the church.
Yes.
And Colossians does a lot more of that. Pretty much all of Colossians 1 especially, but it's kind of 1 and 2 are much more about the like, here's our like shared mutual understanding, right? Like this is our controlling theme. Like Jesus showed us what faithfulness is all about, right? Like, and he's the one we're following, right? Like he's the one, right? It's kind of like Colossians keeps coming back to it over and over and over for a little bit before it finally goes then, okay, good. Now that we've got that settled, here's what we do about that. And Ephesians does some of that, but spends much more time on defining. So here's what it means to be the church because of that.
That's good. I just realized if we went with the word assembled, there would be also a strong Avengers.
The assembled. I mean, it fits. There's like
Gentiles assemble. Yeah,
well, that fits really well with like words like that metaphor of the building. Where all the bricks in the building, like it was Christ is putting it together, assembling the church. And even the parts, many parts, but one body, like it's being assembled, right? Yeah, so it works. So we're the Avengers now. Let's just let's go past assembled.
Okay.
And cooperate under his feet, gave him to the Avengers as head over everything.
Oh, we have to wrap it up on that one. That's fantastic. Hey, thanks everybody for tuning in, I guess, or listening. Thank you, as always, for being part of this journey with us in our spirit of curiosity. The easiest way to support Found in Translation is to leave us a rating or review in your podcast player of choice, or hit like and share of this video that you are watching today. That makes it easier for more people to find out about this conversation that we're holding together. Second best way to support this show is to become a sponsor for just $5 a month. When you do that, you get comment access on the translation's Google Doc and the satisfaction that you're supporting exceptionally nerdy independent media. You can find the link to join the community in the show notes or the posts here. The music you're listening to is by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Found in Translation was produced by Perry FM on unceded Chinook land. Goodbye, Brandon.
Bye, Brandon.
Bye, everybody.